What's up, Buckeye fans? It's Patrick Murphy from Bucknuts and 24/7 Sports here with you today for another episode of the Bucknuts Happy Hour. We're now really into the offseason. Indiana won the national championship, beating Miami on Monday night. Let me say that again. Indiana won the college football national championship on Monday night. It's still wild for me to say that, but that marked the end of the 2025 college football season. One that ended prematurely for the Buckeyes, at least in their eyes, losing in the quarterfinals. Two runners-up Miami, the only two losses of the year for Ohio State, the national champions Indiana and the runners-up Miami. Still disappointing, I think, if you ask anyone inside the Woody Hayes Athletic Center, they would have expected to at least, I think, take a step further. That was my expectation for the Buckeyes, was to at least make the semifinal and see what happened there. Probably would have been good things given the way things turned out and Ole Miss and whatnot, but Buckeyes didn't do it. No point in reflecting on that now. We've done plenty of that over at Bucknuts over the last few weeks. So this week's show, we're going to look ahead and look at some of the decisions that have been made involving the Buckeyes or by Buckeyes so far this offseason. This will look at the biggest moves in terms of players deciding to come back or players from the transfer portal deciding to commit to Ohio State. I'm not going to rank this in any order, but I will give you my thoughts on each one, and we'll kind of go through it here. Before we get into that, if you are watching this on YouTube, please make sure that you hit that thumbs up button, hit the bell for notifications so that you get all of our videos here from Bucknuts. We obviously have these podcasts, this one, the BM5, that we do on a daily or weekly basis, but video interviews. And as I said before, it's basketball season. So if you're into that, we've got plenty from Jake Diebler and his team, pregame, postgame, all that stuff. But we'll be at football again soon, hoping to get to talk to Ryan Day here in the near future about some of these transfer portal additions and hopefully some coaching news in the not so distant future. So, obviously we'll have that, and then anything else we get before spring practice starts. But spring practice is going to be here before we know it. It's already almost the end of January, and spring practice will kick off sometime in mid-March, we believe. So we're getting there close. So make sure you have those notifications turned on. If you're listening to this on your podcast platform of choice, please leave us a 5-star review. Leave us comments. All of that is important for what we do. So, like I said, I want to get into some of the biggest decisions in my eyes that have already happened so far this offseason. And this is the offseason. This is when we talk and project and guess and rank and all of those things. So you may have some different thoughts. I'm sure there's other people out here who will look at similar lists and those will be different that cover the team. This is just my perspective on it, my thoughts. And that's the fun of this time of year, right? We can debate. We can have discussions on this guy or that guy or how the Buckeyes are going to use this guy or that guy. And, again, there'll be some disagreement. That's perfectly fine. But this is the way I see it in terms of the decisions that have been made regarding Ohio State. And there could still be some more. We'll kind of get to that at the end. But I'm going to start with a guy who is returning to Ohio State for his 5th year, and that's defensive end Kenyatta Jackson Jr. I think it's probably gone under the radar, maybe not so much in Buckeye Nation, but across the country, the importance of Kenyatta coming back. Caden Curry and Kenyatta Jackson were both guys who had been in the program for years. This past season was their first year starting. You don't see that very much, which I think is important. And Kenyatta stuck with it long enough to go for a 5th year. Caden Curry did not have that option. I know because he said it, that had there been a 5th year of eligibility granted, which may happen in the near future, he probably would have come back for another year to work with Larry Johnson and Matt Patricia in this defense. But Kenyatta Jackson is back because he redshirted his freshman year. And look, if you just look at the numbers for Kenyatta this past season, there's nothing that really jumps off the page. He was good, not great statistically. 28 tackles, 11 tackles for a loss, 6.5 sacks. That is good numbers. I think there's a reason that Caden Curry got more sort of exposure nationally. But if you look at Kenyatta Jackson's last 7 games, when after, I guess I should say, he sort of went to the coaching staff from what we understand, and kind of asked to be unleashed or allowed to rush the passer more than what he was doing in the first half of the season. Over those last 7 games, 19 tackles, 6.5 tackles for a loss, and 4 sacks. So Kenyatta's production really ramped up over the second half of the year, and I think we got to see the ability that we all kind of knew was there, right? This was a pretty highly recruited kid coming out of high school down in Florida in Miami Gardens. He was a guy who, just hadn't had the opportunity at Ohio State and had stuck with it again and wanted to make an impact for the Buckeyes. And now we'll have an opportunity to sort of be the guy in terms of edge rushers in 2026. And I think it's huge. Had Kenyatta declared for the NFL draft, there's always the caveat that you could have gone to the transfer portal, right? But I think it's always better if you have a guy that you can keep, and you do, for a few reasons. And this will apply to another guy we'll talk about in a few minutes. But one, I think they know your program. They know the coaches. As silly as it may sound, they know the building. They're not going to have to get used to anything new. Everything is familiar. Kenyatta's been walking through the halls of the Woody Hayes Athletic Center. He's been practicing under Larry Johnson. He knows Ryan Day, all this stuff for the last 4 years, and now he's going to do it again. So you don't have to introduce him to anything or try and teach him certain ways of doing things that may have been different from a previous school. I also think that, and this is not true with everyone, but I do think that it's a bit easier to negotiate with players, because let's be honest, these guys aren't working for free anymore. So Kenyatta coming back, part of that reason is because he can get paid by Ohio State and improve his draft stock to hopefully get paid even more on the other end of the 2026 season. So, I think it's just easier to sort of negotiate with those guys that you already know and want to be a part of your program. And I think trying to go get a transfer portal defensive end in this case just requires a bit more. I'm not saying it costs more necessarily. I think everybody's different, but I just think it's an easier process. So I think you get that. And I think there's a chance that Kenyatta can have a really big 5th year with Ohio State. Like I said, I read those numbers over the second half of the season. I think when he's able to do some things and use his size, use his speed, athleticism, all that, he can be, maybe he's not the top defensive end group in the country. Maybe he can be, but I think there's a very real chance that he could be in that kind of second tier, similar to what Caden Curry was this year, a good, impactful player with a ceiling that is beyond that because of his athleticism and things like that. And this is something I think about when any guy decides to return is what would it look like if he'd left? Again, you can go to the transfer portal, but just talking about what's on the roster, I mean, you're talking about Bo Atkinson, who came over from North Carolina last offseason, didn't do a ton. You're talking about Zion Grady, who's someone that the Buckeyes are excited about, but, only played, I think, a little over 200 snaps, maybe 300 snaps this past year. Just was a sort of a rotational piece. I think he can have a much bigger role next season, but to count on him to be your primary pass rusher, at least your returning one, I think would have been really difficult. So having Kenyatta back, I think is big for the Buckeye defensive line, a defensive line that's going to lose Caden Curry, Caden McDonald, and then Tywan Malone, all 3 out the door. So you have one starter returning. You can make an argument about Edric Houston being a starter, but he only started a few games dealing with an injury, and then Tywan Malone just passed him up basically. So I think Kenyatta Jackson being back has the potential to elevate his ceiling, elevate the pass rush ability of Ohio State for all the reasons I just touched on. The next guy, and we'll get into the transfer portal here. It's actually 2 guys. Is it running back? And I'll start with the returning guys, or the returning guy, I guess I should say here, in Bo Jackson, because I do think this kind of goes hand in hand. But having Bo Jackson back, again, a guy that is familiar. It's only been 1 year in the program, but is familiar with the program, knows Carlos Lachlan, knows the way he coaches, all that stuff, right? And then, you have an Ohio kid who, grew up watching the Buckeyes and wants to be at Ohio State. And then you add in that this was a guy in his true freshman season, despite not seeing a lot of playing time early in the year, finished with over 1,000 yards, only the fifth Ohio State true freshman to do that, and 6 touchdowns, averaged 6.1 yards per carry. He did some very impressive things this season. And, I have been one of the people that has said, there's definitely room for improvement, and they need Bo Jackson to improve. But his decision to come back gives you a 1,000-yard back who has plenty of tread still on the tires, and I think can only get better. Again, is he the elite of elite? Maybe not. We'll see what that ceiling looks like. Again, we've only seen 1 year of Bo Jackson, but it was pretty good. He still needs to be able to break some tackles, make some guys miss a bit more. I think he needs to be able to, kind of hit that top gear quicker so he's not getting tripped up and things like that. But again, he's coming out of his freshman year. And had he left, again, think about what you're looking at if you're Ohio State and that running back room. You're definitely having to go to the transfer portal. But the Buckeyes did go to the transfer portal, and they got Jacoby Jackson, another Jackson from Florida, a guy who has been around the game quite a bit already. He brings you that experience running back that Carlos Lachlan likes to have. In his 2 seasons playing with Florida, the numbers aren't great, dealt with some injuries, which is something the Buckeyes certainly had to consider in deciding which way to go. There were other running backs they were interested in the transfer portal, but in the 2 years, 607 yards, 7 touchdowns, average 5 yards per carry. Last season, only played 4 games, but 98 yards and 4 touchdowns. Is this CJ Donaldson all over again? I've had a couple people ask me that. Like, is this that type of player? No, I think he's got a higher ceiling than CJ Donaldson. I think he can do some things similarly. I think he can do some things differently. But what I do think is he's a good complement to have to Bo Jackson. Carlos Lachlan, you saw how well it worked in 2024 when you had 2 running backs who could really carry the load. That really wasn't the case as much in 2025. The Buckeyes wanted it to be, and early in the season, CJ Donaldson and James Peoples were those guys. But as the season progressed, it became clear that neither of those guys was going to be the guy, and they certainly weren't the tandem the Buckeyes were hoping for. And in the end, Bo Jackson ends up with 179 carries. CJ Donaldson, the next most at 96. If you compare that to 2024, Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins, the numbers were much more similar. Quinshon, 194 carries, Travion Henderson, 144. And obviously those guys played the whole season. So I think now you have a guy, if everything goes right, and Jackson can stay healthy, Jacoby Jackson, that is, I think you have a guy who can step in and complement Bo Jackson pretty well. A guy who you're not afraid to put him on the field. I think he can help in certain situations. He can handle his own drives, those type of things. And then, obviously you have Isaiah West, Turbo Rogers, other guys that it can fit in potentially at running back. Legend Bay, the freshman incoming, who, we'll see where he ends up, playing most of his snaps his freshman year, but could certainly help out at running back to some degree if they need him to. So I think that you've got now pretty clear top 2 with the Jacksons. And then I think Isaiah West, if he can take a jump this offseason, like that gives you a pretty good third, because there were a lot of things I liked about Isaiah West this past season. He ended up with only 310 yards and 2 touchdowns, but did it on 59 carries and only played in 10 games. So, 5.3 yards per carry. I think you feel okay with that with a guy coming out of his freshman season. So I think the backfield, we were excited about it this time last year. Don't get me wrong, with CJ Donaldson coming in and thinking James Peoples was going to be that guy. The good thing is we've seen Bo Jackson have 1,000 yards in a season. And we've seen a guy like Jacoby Jackson be productive. As productive as you would have liked, I don't know. Again, 509 yards in 2024 and 7 touchdowns. That's his best season at this level. But you look at some of the reaction from Florida fans, and that's not the end all be all. But I do think there were people that were disappointed that he didn't stick with the Gators and have another year there, try and get healthy and whatnot. So, I don't always want to take that as this is a good move, this is a bad move. But I do think you kind of get a sense of what fans thought and that perspective that unless you're watching Florida for some reason every week, you probably don't have on a player. And sometimes that's wrong. I think there were some Ole Miss fans, despite Quinshon Judkins' production, that didn't think he was going to be a good fit, whether that be locker room or anything. And it turned out to work out great, right? There are other examples we could go into. So I think that you can read into that to some degree, but I do think this makes a lot of sense for the Buckeyes backfield. Another returning guy that I think made a huge decision for Ohio State is Jermaine Matthews Jr. At cornerback. I think if you look kind of at the end of Jermaine's season, and obviously there is the last 2 games specifically, I think people will think of the touchdown he gave up against Indiana and then the play against Indiana on 3rd down that kept that final drive alive and really allowed Indiana to milk the clock and run out the game almost run out the game, I guess I should say, in the Big Ten championship. But I thought towards the end of the season, whether it was wear and tear or whatnot, like Jermaine just wasn't as productive as he had been. And I think he's a really good player. I think that helped the Buckeyes in order to get him back on campus. I think if he'd finished really strong, he probably ends up heading to the NFL draft and is another high cornerback pick for coming out of Ohio State. So getting Jermaine back, gives you your number 1 corner. You've already lost Davison Igbinosun, so you're down a guy there that you have to replace already. And again, if you don't have Jermaine back, what are you doing? Well, you're definitely going to the transfer portal. You have Devin Sanchez, who had an up and down freshman year, but you hope he learns and grows from that and can build upon it to be a much better second-year player. That the Buckeyes are very high on Devin Sanchez. That's why he played as much as he did as a freshman, just because they felt like he needed to get his feet wet. And then you have him. And maybe if Jermaine leaves, or if they know Jermaine's leaving, a guy like Aaron Scott sticks around. But again, you're going with 2 very young or very inexperienced, I guess I should say, a 3rd-year guy who hasn't played much in Aaron Scott, and a 2nd-year guy who has played some, but is still a 2nd-year guy and wasn't a starter as a freshman. In Devin Sanchez as your 2 starting cornerbacks, most likely. Now, maybe they go to the transfer portal, are a bit more aggressive with somebody like a Kayan Lee or something like that to get a guy, a more proven guy if both Davison and Jermaine leave. But, we could speculate on what ifs in these situations all the time. The point is, you've got Jermaine Matthews back. And I think that gives you one of the best cornerbacks in the country when he's at his best in your secondary, which I think is huge. And you're losing a lot just defensively, experience-wise. I mentioned the guys on the defensive line, both starting linebackers, Davis and Igbinosun, Lorenzo Styles Jr., and at the nickel, Caleb Downs. So getting Jermaine back was a big deal because not only was he a starter last year, but by the end of the playoff run in 2024, he was playing as much as Denzel Burke, right? So sometimes playing over Denzel Burke. So he was almost a de facto starter at that point anyway. So he's got a lot of experience. I think he's going to grow from some of the struggles this year. And, we say struggles. Cornerbacks get beat sometimes. It just happens, right? Like it's like being a left tackle. Sometimes you're not going to win every rep. And, when you're a cornerback, especially if you're in man-to-man coverage on an island, when you get beat, sometimes it looks like it did it for the touchdown against Indiana or the first down against Indiana. But I thought Jermaine, for the most part, was really good this season and is only going to be able to build on that. I think, I'm pulling this up here real quick. I think he only gave up 1 other touchdown other than the Indiana one. Let me double check that. But either way, he was one of the lockdown corners this season. Yeah, gave up 2 touchdowns. The one to Indiana in the Big Ten championship game. Oh, and week 1 against Texas. So in 2 big games, yes, he gave up touchdowns, but those are 2. Both plays were really good. If you think back to them, I happened to have a front row seat to the one against Texas. That was the best throw Arch Manning made that entire game and put it on the money. And that was Jermaine's first real start. So first game of the season, basically the last game of the season. Also had an interception against Texas, and on 44 targets, he gave up 28 catches, which 63.6% of the time, but 44 targets isn't much. So that shows you his coverage for 281 yards, not a ton of yards, and 2 touchdowns. His coverage grade, according to Pro Football Focus, was a 61.3. So that can certainly get better. But that's why he's back, right? If it were really good, he would be in the NFL or headed to the NFL draft. So I think getting Jermaine back at least gives you one of your 2 corners with experience on the outside there. And you assume it's going to be Devin Sanchez on the other side. We'll see. But now for sure Jermaine's back. That's a guy we just put in there. We don't worry about it. And like I said, all of these guys, Kenyatta Jackson as well, need to keep improving this offseason because they don't just come back because they love Ohio State, right? The next one I will bring up is another twofer, and that is the safety additions Ohio State made on back-to-back days. They added Earl Little Jr. from Florida State and Terry Moore from Duke. When Earl Little Jr., it was a Sunday when his commitment was announced, and I think everyone at that point was kind of expecting him to be the Caleb Downs replacement, and a versatile guy, had a really good season at Florida State last year. I believe was their most valuable player on defense, which, I know Florida State wasn't great, but 76 tackles, 2 tackles for a loss, 4 interceptions, 2 passes defended, 2 forced fumbles. We'll pull up his PFF grades here to see. I looked them up earlier. But I think everyone kind of thought like, oh, okay, here's your Caleb Downs replacement. And coverage 71.6 for him, according to PFF, and gave up 14 catches on 21 targets, which is a decent percentage, but again, low numbers, and safety is a little weird sometimes. Also kind of depends on the defense. Also, like Jermaine Matthews, only gave up 2 touchdowns. But it became clear pretty quickly that Earl Little Jr. was not just going to be that replacement for Caleb Downs, because the next day you land the commitment of Terry Moore from Duke. Now, Terry Moore is coming off of a year where he did not play due to a knee injury. I believe he suffered it in the ACC championship game the year before. And so you do have to deal with that. You have to make sure health-wise. And I was asked a couple times on our message board, like, does Ohio State do physicals or checks on these players that, health-wise? Yes, they do. It's like a player in professional sports. There's some sort of medical done to make sure everything looks okay before, they're going to do that. They're going to take a guy. They want to make sure too, right? You're not just taking a guy who's going to be hurt, and you never know. I mean, like with any of these guys. But there is certainly a little bit of a guy who just missed a season. Is he going to be healthy? Yeah, he should be. There's plenty of time to recover. But then can he get back to how he was playing? And Terry Moore was playing really well, really, really well. If you look at his PFF grades in 2024, he was rated higher than Caleb Downs, if you believe the PFF grades. I believe he was the second best safety in the country that year. I'm going to pull it up here, but no doubt he was having a fantastic season before he gets hurt. And if he stays healthy, I think he's probably already in the NFL, or at least came back, had another big year, and goes off to the NFL after last season. So you get a tandem, so to speak, there. And I think now when we look at the bigger picture, it's probably going to be Earl Little Jr. as that nickel replacing a Lorenzo Styles Jr. and Terry Moore playing sort of the Caleb Downs role. And Terry Moore had his defensive rating in 2024, according to Pro Football Focus, was 90.1 of players with a minimum of 400 snaps. That was second best in the country. Caleb Downs was 87.9. That was eighth best in the country. In case you're wondering, J.J. Roberts of Marshall had the best grade in the country, defensive grade. But what I think Ohio State is able to do is be really versatile in the secondary now. I think you've seen that in the past. You saw it last year. But I think Earl Little, he's played that deeper safety, right? So he can drop into coverage. You're not going to have to teach that to him. With Terry Moore, you've got a guy who can play all over. He's lined up all over the field, in the secondary, in the box, all that. So you've got a lot of versatility there. And I think what that allows and what has happened in the past is that these guys the defense can kind of morph into what it needs to be on any given play. I think back to, I want to say it was the playoff quarterfinal against Miami. Maybe it was the Big Ten championship game. One of those two. Like at one point, the Buckeyes line up like you expect with Lorenzo Styles Jr. in the slot and Caleb Downs and Jalen McClain back as sort of safeties. Caleb Downs closer to the line of scrimmage, but then there was motion or something. Indiana changed some things, or Miami, whoever it was, and the Buckeyes just like you could see just like this shift, and it was led by Caleb Downs, but it was, all of a sudden you end up with Lorenzo Styles Jr. as your deepest safety and the other two guys much closer to the line of scrimmage. And they all just kind of morphed into these positions together. And, that's not easy. That comes with time. But I think the fact that you're getting two experienced players who have played these different positions before in Earl Little Jr. and Terry Moore is really important. And it makes that ability to do that with new players quicker. And again, like we were saying with Kenyatta Jackson or Jermaine Matthews, if you didn't land these guys, okay, maybe you have a Bryce West who plays that nickel spot. Maybe if Jermaine comes back, you move him inside, you find another outside corner. He played well in that spot. The deep safety, maybe it's Malik Hartford, maybe it's Fahim Delane stays. Both those guys were in the transfer portal. Maybe they leave still and it's Leroy Roker. But do you have that ability to kind of have this amoeba defense that can sort of change into what you need it to be on any given play? You're going to coach that. You're going to work at that. But these are guys, I think, because of their experience, you are able to probably get those points across quicker. Things happen quicker. They've seen everything before. So I think it helps. And all of these guys that I've mentioned, it helps you be older. And I think we're seeing in college football how much that matters. Michigan a few years ago, right? Like that was a veteran team. Ohio State last year, you had a veteran team. Indiana this past year, maybe the oldest team in college football ever. They were just pretty old. And so now with Ohio State, you want to develop the Bryce Wests, the Leroy Rokers, the Fahim Delanes. You want to develop and see these guys you've recruited since high school and worked with for the last however many years, develop into starters and stars and things like that. But you also need to look at what makes you best to win next season, because I do think it's hard in college football these days to think much beyond next season. And I think veterans like Earl Little Jr. and Terry Moore help you with that, because you're pretty sure, as much as you can that you will get, veteran production. What you've seen on film, you assume can fit because you've seen it, right? As opposed to some guys that haven't had that playing time. So I think that's really important. for this group, this whole team. And that's not just in the secondary, that's at all of these positions, right? You want to get old and stay old, which is the sort of college basketball term that was used for a while now. And now it as applies to college football as well, with the transfer portal, with NIL, all that stuff. The next guy I will mention is a funny one. Connor Hawkins. Some of you now, most of you who are diehards may know exactly what it is, but some of you may say, who's Connor Hawkins? Connor Hawkins is a transfer from Baylor, a kicker from Baylor. Now it may sink in a little bit more. And look, I think I have been less hard, I guess I will say, on Jaden Fielding than a lot of people. Look, the big kicks weren't there the last 2 years, right? But in his Ohio State career, the guy made 78.9% of his kicks. Last season, he made 80% of his kicks. Did he make the big ones? No. But for me, that's less of a concern than he's gone. So even if he was bad, even if you could work with him more, like he's at eligibility, he was done. Jaden Fielding, whether you liked him, it didn't matter. He was leaving the program after the year. And then the kicker you brought in to compete with, I guess you could say, Jaden Fielding last offseason, that whatever the situation was going to be there, Jackson Corville, who came from Ball State, he entered the transfer portal early on after getting very little opportunity, kicked 4 extra points, I believe, this season. So not much, whatever the case was there, it's tough to say. But I ended up with no kickers on the roster, literally 0. And that was not going to be a good way to go into the 2026 season. Even if you're a team that doesn't kick very often, you still need a kicker every once in a while, as Ohio State saw this past season, saw against Michigan the year before. I think, I know you just have to have somebody, right? Well, they didn't just go get somebody. I think this is a positive sign. Connor Hawkins, as I said, came from Baylor. In 2024, he kicked 1 field goal. I believe he redshirted that year. And then last year was 18 of 22, so 81.1%, a little bit better than Jaden Fielding. What you'll probably like to know the most is from his long is 54 yards, and he is 3 of 4. 3 of 5 for his career, 3 of 4 last year from 50 plus yards. So this brings us into the discussion of special teams and how Ohio State views it. And I've said this for a while now. I don't think, as much as Ryan Day says, special teams is going to be a weapon, it's one of those show me, don't tell me things. I don't think they pay that much attention to special teams. I don't think it's a place where they feel like they need to they need to give a lot of resources. I got that word wrong. Give a lot of resources and really make it the weapon that Ryan Day said. If you don't put a ton into it, you can put resources elsewhere, but you do end up in situations like you did in the Big Ten championship game, where you have a kicker whose confidence is low on pressure kicks and he misses, or again in the college football playoff against Miami. So I think Connor Hawkins is a step in the right direction in that sense. Is he perfect? Is he the best kicker in the country you could have gone and gotten? Maybe not, but he's young. He's can make some long kicks. He's not ever missed an extra point, which is another good thing. And then, I think you can work from there to that's a good foundation to build on, as opposed to, if Jaden Fielding had another year running it back with him, you had time with Jackson Corville. Clearly you didn't see enough from him to warrant going that direction. And so he enters the transfer portal. So I think this is important because you need a kicker. First of all, you need a kicker on the roster, but also I think this is a guy who can make some big kicks for you. And you hope that you don't get in those situations, but when you almost inevitably do, you've got somebody, whether it's a long kick, whether it's a, just a crucial kick at the end of a game, like we saw in the Big Ten championship game. The one question I think will be interesting is Connor Hawkins is a kid he's from Liberty Hill, Texas, excuse me. And he played 2 years at Baylor. I doubt he has a ton of experience kicking in the cold, kicking in the snow. I will say, because I know I'm not the first person to bring this up, Ohio State, as much as, unless they are in that first round of the college football playoff, like the Michigan game obviously can get cold, and snowy. We saw it last year up in Ann Arbor, but in actuality, the Buckeyes don't play a ton of games in cold weather. Now, will the calendar shift? The schedule, are you going to end up playing more playoff games on home campuses, things like that? Like maybe that becomes a bigger factor. I do think that the weather thing is a bit overblown just because like end of November in Columbus isn't really that it's cold a lot of times, but it's not crazy cold. And I don't think you get a ton of snow. Now, again, you could play Michigan, they could have to play a November game up in Minnesota or Wisconsin, maybe at some point where that becomes a bigger thing. But, I think overall, that's probably not a huge concern, but it is something to think about and something to talk about. And then the last one I've got, again, I'll kind of do another twofer here, but it's the two wide receivers Ohio State landed out of the transfer portal, starting with Devin McEwen, the transfer from UTSA, and then Kyle Parker from LSU. I don't think either guy is a huge get, but I don't think the Buckeyes needed or really had the ability to go get a big name wide receiver. Also, back up, these are the first two wide receiver transfers Ohio State's taken. Brian Hartline did not take transfer wide receivers. This is a shifting of philosophy, which we thought we might see under Cortez Hankton, who did take transfer wide receivers at LSU and Georgia. And if you want to read more, I did sort of a deep dive on kind of grading that hire on Bucknuts. You can read about that, and it goes into his recruiting, his transfers, his development of players, things like that. But that's an aside. I think these two guys are really interesting. And Kyle Parker in particular, one, because he was at LSU under Hankton, and two, because I think he can be the kind of slot receiver that Ohio State and really both these guys could play in the slot. Parker is 5'11", 195, McEwen 6 foot, 195. So similar builds there. But I think I think Parker in particular, like it gives you a different option at slot receiver than a Brandon Inniss, who did not have the productive year that I think a lot of people thought he might, but I think there's still a lot there. Like I'm not ruling Brandon Inniss out of having a big senior season. And in fact, I would be more surprised if he didn't, and they figure out a way to do things. But one of the things that makes Brandon so good is, he's just willing to do kind of the dirty work. And, some of the blocks, some of the routes he ran, like they were all important this year, whether he had the statistics to make it look great or not. He was also pretty banged up. So now you've got options there, and you've got more of the speed guy who can step in and kind of take the roof off the defense, take top off the defense. And that's something Ohio State really missed, I think, this past year. There's a lot of talk about, they didn't play fast enough, right? And, we get to the playoff and you expected Ryan Day to go more tempo. Well, if you really look at it in 2024, they didn't really go much faster either. What they did was score fast because they had explosive plays. Think back to some of the plays in the playoff. Now, not all of that was receivers. You had Travion Henderson, right? And guys like that. You think back to the first play of the Rose Bowl and the pass to G. Scott. But I just don't think last year, especially as Jeremiah Smith sort of got banged up, you didn't have guys that could make those big plays, or guys that, you could throw something short and that becomes a big play. Like last year, so many of their big plays were Julian Sand and Carnell Tate deep or Jeremiah Smith deep. There wasn't a lot of, hey, let's get the ball into this guy's hands and let's let him create the big play. And I think that you have this opportunity here with these receiver additions. So I think that's important because I think that changes the way teams have to defend you. I think it gives you more options in your offense. And I think that's all good. I also think it's a sign that maybe we're going to see a bit more rotation at wide receiver than we've seen recently with Brian Hartline. I don't know if you bring in a guy like Devin McEwen with 1 year left, right? For example, if you're not going to get him on the field, but you've also got Jeremiah Smith, you've got Chris Henry Jr., who I think, if we're just being honest, he's going to be paid like a starting receiver at the college level. So you're going to want to get him on the field, and you got Brandon in it, so it seems to me that there will be some more rotation at wide receiver. Does that mean you're taking Jeremiah Smith off the field that often? I doubt it. But maybe in that slot position, or, maybe sometimes you take Chris Henry off and play two guys that are quote unquote slot guys, because I do think, we've seen Ohio State receivers and the way you can move them around and stuff to get matchups and things like that. So I think that the addition of these two receivers kind of tells you some things that the Buckeyes want to do heading into 2026. Had there been a couple more decisions announced yet, I think there could have been a couple more added to this list, and that is the coordinators. We've been trying to keep up with all this on Bucknuts, so go over there on the message board if you want to read about some of that. There's been quite a few threads. I've tried to respond with what I know on those, but look, I have a good feeling that Matt Patricia will be back. That would have been obviously a big decision this offseason that we would have talked about. And I do think the Buckeyes are still planning on going out and getting an offensive coordinator. They have to find the right guy. I think the idea would be that it would be an experienced guy who's called plays, who can sort of be that head coach of the offense like Matt Patricia is of the defense. Let Ryan Day go back to that CEO role and go from there. But in terms of names and stuff, I think it's pretty early in this process. I think Ryan Day was waiting to get the college football season over, let the NFL season sort of play out more. Those, obviously those guys are options. They've had success hiring coordinators from the NFL in the past. So I think this is where it kind of all begins as you wait for Matt Patricia, who, by the way, has been out on the road recruiting for the Buckeyes the last couple of days, which is a positive sign. But those are two that would have made the list had they happened. We will certainly address those as we get answers on what the Buckeyes are doing at both of those positions. But I do expect that to come. Matt Patricia, I believe, was announced February 20th, officially announced somewhere around there last year. So we're still a month out from when that happened, and that worked out pretty well, right? Now, is there a Matt Patricia out there to go get like that on the offensive side of the ball? I don't know, but it's just to point out that there's not always a need to hurry up and make these decisions ASAP, right? You can take your time, make sure you get the right guy. So we're going to wrap that up. I'm sure that you guys have some opinions on the decisions that have been made, additions, returning guys, all that stuff. Let me know if that's the case, either in comments here, on social media, on the Bucknuts message board when we post this. I appreciate everyone for tuning in. Again, watching this on YouTube, please hit that thumbs up button and turn on the bell for notifications to get all of our videos, not just our podcast, but all of our videos. And again, podcast platform of choice, 5-star review, comments, all that good stuff. Again, I'm Patrick Murphy with Bucknuts and 24/7 Sports. Thank you for tuning in.